There is a place in New Zealand you actually may never see. And this is not an isolated experience, this is a story I keep running into over and over again. The situation you have around it are crumbling roads, helicopters, floods, and a melting river of ice, in an area that literally just seems to be waiting for the earthquake of the century. Yet none of those have hit the region and the people living there as hard as the last 2 years. Begging the question in more than just one sense: what will remain of it? The Franz Josef Glacier, or as it is known in Maori, Karominata Ahine Huketere, is not just some glacier in the southern Alps of New Zealand. It is a reminiscence of the last ice age. Thousands of years old, a place where ancient ice meets tempered rainforest, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the steepest glaciers in the country, one of the fastest moving glaciers in the world, and on top of all that, super accessible. Until it's not. Franz Josef is located in the west coast region of New Zealand's South Island. It is connected and very close to another glacier of similar qualities, the Fox Glacier. If you're driving through the west coast, chances are high you will pass by the area. So why not stop and see not only one, but two readily accessible glaciers? Sold? Good, because that's what people in the townships close to the glaciers live by. Tourism. Now, what do you think happens to a town that is built on top of a fault line, haunted by floods, glacier collapse, glacier retreat, and on top of all that gets cut off from international visitors? Other than that, this is also kind of a special video and episode for me, since glaciers are among a few of the things that evoke a very sentimental feeling of awe in me. And whether you feel the same or not, regardless, glaciers fascinate people from all over the world, and travel seems to be having kind of a comeback right now. Or maybe not, too soon to say. But people will travel again, and I think there's something we need to speak about. And no, it is not what you're thinking. I think the best way to tackle this head-on is to retell our personal experience. Walking up to the first viewpoint from the parking literally just takes minutes, and this is also where the whole issue becomes very clear. My first thought was, oh my god, the glacier, there it is! Obviously, this is where my eyes went first, but what actually surprised me was what I saw at second glance. And it really doesn't have much to do with the glacier other than the fact that it once stretched all the way to where we stood. Yet all there is today is nothing but rocks and rubble. But that was 100 years ago. I mean, not that I could really imagine what that time would have even looked like, so whatever, right? We moved on, surrounded by mountains and waterfalls, but also something else. Until we reach another sign. And now we don't talk 100 years. Now we talk 10. And it is exactly at this point, whether it was back then or now, that my comprehensions simply blacks out. From 100 years to now. And that is what is left. Or actually what was left. That was back in 2019, and the chances of the glacier advancing again seem pretty slim. Or to put it into the words of Dr. Brian Anderson, it's not much. An 80-meter advance after a 1,400-meter retreat is one step forward after 18 steps backwards. And this is not the first time I see myself confronted with the topic. When we visited Canada in 2017, I was so looking forward to see the Columbia ice field. A glacier you can set foot on. Except that you couldn't. Not really. You can take a bus that will take you onto the ice, but so far from the actual viewpoint that you cannot really see the viewpoint anymore. The glacier is still there, but it has retracted and destabilized to the point that walking onto it, to put it bluntly, is dangerous as f***. Same with Franz Josef. You could simply hop over the barrier and make your way up, which you totally can if you don't get crushed by a rockfall or caught in a spontaneous river surge, both pretty much caused by the fact that the glacier is melting. And even if you make it onto the glacier, there's quite the chance you might break through the ice and get stuck there for life pretty much. This year we visited Norway and we went up to the Barbrin Glacier. Same thing, you get to a viewpoint, closer but still far from the actual ice. And somewhere around there is a sign telling you, don't be stupid, don't even try. Yet, despite all, I cannot but think every time I see one of those things, holy shit, this thing is amazing. It is just so hard to comprehend how huge they actually are. But it is even harder to comprehend how huge they must have been. Not once, not 100 years ago, just 10 years back already seems incomprehensible. And this is happening everywhere. Glaciers are melting all around the world, like literally all around the world. And yes, glaciers advance and retreat. It's a natural cycle. That's right. And they did advance for quite a while worldwide, but then they've also taken quite a nosedive worldwide. So, what about the helicopters? Tourism attraction, that's the short answer, pretty much. You can take a heli up the glacier and then walk on it. And you may be thinking now, wait, glaciers melting, helicopters? That probably has to do with all that CO2 stuff, right? Why again are they taking helicopters up there? Actually, the helicopters formerly have been not so much a reason for the retreat than a reaction to it. Officially, Franz Josef is in continuous retreat since 2008, somewhat gradual. But in 2012, a massive part of the glacier collapsed. And that was the point where accessing the glacier by foot, sooner than anyone thought, suddenly was out of question. The best solution to keep things up kind of were helicopters. And it is not that everyone just went with it. That measure was somewhat questionable from the start. But in terms of tourism, it worked. So you have a melting main attraction in town, but that's not all there is. You can kind of imagine glaciers as this rock-solid ice that is gluing together everything it sits on, but also keeps water up in the mountains. And that does not only regard to recent rainfall, but if you actually do the math, glaciers thousands and thousands of years old, ice thousands and thousands of years old. Ice essentially is water. Now what do you get if that ice melts? You get a waterfall, kind of flushing down the past in a way. And after a while, you get a river. And every now and then, when a big chunk of ice or rock breaks loose, you get a big one. When the ice at the edges of the mountains becomes unstable, so does the rock. And additionally, frozen water in between the rocks beneath the ice doesn't hold shit together anymore. And when the ice melts and rock surfaces see the sunlight for the very first time in thousands and thousands of years, they heat up and speed up all the melting action. If you've ever been to a glacier, you know the closer you get, the colder it gets. Now guess what? If the ice melts, it gets less cold, and the temperature up there changes for the very first time in thousands and thousands of years. And when the temperature changes and the flow of water changes, pretty much everything changes. The region around the glaciers was hit by major floods in 2016 and also in 2019, shortly before we went up to Franz Josef and Fox Glacier. Fox Glacier for quite a while has actually been a real alternative, since Franz Josef would retreat further and further up into the mountains, sending clear signals to everyone following by foot that it did not wish company. Yet what we found, or actually what we did not find, was the road leading up to the main hike, because it was gone. Simply gone, taken by the flood. Even on the alternative route, we could clearly see the impact of it. Yet you could still go, you could still visit. Until you couldn't, of course. New Zealand at this point still remains closed to almost all international travelers, all while the Franz Josef township keeps shrinking in population and workforce. Entering kind of a hibernation state, waiting for it to all go away. All that while sitting on top of a fault that stretches across the island, which produces a large earthquake every 300 years. The last such earthquake has been in 1717. I'll let you do the math. When I said that there is a place in New Zealand you actually may never see, I did not necessarily mean that Franz Josef would be consumed by time and the changing climate before you can ever reach it. Which eventually will happen, that seems pretty much out of question. What I meant was rather that there was more than just one factor leading to this. It has been a build-up, and the glacier, while probably surviving all of us, may become unreachable to the average person decades before eventually disappearing. And as it stands right now, the 1.5 hour walk to the final viewpoint we have been to has been shortened because the river has cut off access to the valley floor. Leaving you with a 30-minute walk to the place where the glacier once has been 100 years ago. So will people even bother visiting? I think they will. Around 2004 and 2014, reports were published elaborating on the issue of future tourism around Franz Josef. People believed at the time that they would somehow make ends meet tourism-wise, but they weren't particularly looking at a bright future. This was after the 2012 partial collapse of the glacier, and then it all took off. At the time of the reports, it was almost consensus that tourism numbers would decrease as the glacier would retreat. Yet despite the glacier retreating faster than anyone anticipated, tourism experienced a renaissance. Not only that, but if people came, they came to see the glacier. The title of the reports from back then, Last Chance Tourism. A phenomenon best explained simply, seeing stuff before it's gone. Maybe to elaborate a bit more on it, last chance tourism is a wicked mixture of loss aversion and biophilia. If you've ever read Thinking Fast and Slow, you know loss aversion is the real deal. Actually, you don't even have to read it to intuitively understand the bottom line. Losses loom larger than gains. Getting our shit under control often means to cut back and give up on privileges or even just norms, independently of how much we actually like or need them. We rather passively maintain the status quo than actively seeking out the risk of improvement. Losses loom larger than gains. Much, much larger. And biophilia is a term I stumbled upon in Elizabeth Colbert's newest book. It basically is our intuitive liking of nature, not so much consciously as in loving it, but rather subconsciously in terms of the well-being it can provide. The line that I found hit quite close to home. It went like this. For whatever reason, call it biophilia, call it care for God's creation, call it heart-stopping fear, People are reluctant to be the asteroid. And they truly are. Let's not forget what's at the center of this issue here. It's not the glaciers, it's people. So do you really think they simply don't care? If you've ever been in a situation where you knew what you needed to do, but you didn't, whether it was finally quitting the job you hate or just starting a healthy diet, you may understand this. Because pre-pandemic, the world to these people looked more than fine. Now pair that with century-long traditions and personal identification. This place literally has been home and livelihood to people. And what you get is something very human. Feeling torn and living in ambiguity is something as human as there can be. Consider this. One thing that might actually help slow glacial retreat would, amongst other things, be to live a more conscious and sustainable lifestyle. But for that, what you mainly need is knowledge and awareness. Because what reason is there to change your ways if you don't understand why? But guess what? If you never get to see a glacier, you don't even know what that thing is. I know I wouldn't, because for the longest time I didn't have a clue about it. But I remember very clearly that the first time I went snowboarding in Austria, the first time I saw glacial ice and actually was even able to touch it, I don't really know what it is, but something changed my whole perception of this issue forever. Or as one DOC manager in the last tourism report put it, understanding of what is going on is certainly reduced when they can't see the white piece of ice. So if people don't come and people don't see, people may never understand. In reality, there is very rarely an easy answer to a complicated question or a simple solution to a complex problem. Personally, I do not believe that there is such a thing as one answer or one solution. The paradox lives in everything we do create and obliterate, as in the fact of losing something you hold dear. Loss, no matter how you portray it, is something you cannot see. You can only feel it.